Just 1 week after laying my loving husband to rest, my own son, my only child, was throwing my belongings out onto the street, screaming in my face, "Get out, you stinking old woman." The only inheritance my husband left me was $250 and a cryptic hint about a storage unit full of junk, which only made my son laugh and scorn me all the more. My name is Sarah Miller. I'm a 72-year-old woman from Richmond, Virginia, and that was the moment my life hit rock bottom. But it was also the beginning of an unbelievable journey. If you've ever felt betrayed, abandoned, or if you're just looking for a little glimmer of hope in the ashes, please stay with me. Give this story a thumbs up, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and be sure to follow my channel to hear the whole story. Down below in the comments, tell me your story, because none of us deserves to be alone in our fight. The silence after a loved one passes has a weight all its own. It's not a peaceful quiet. It's a void, a tangible emptiness where laughter, footsteps, and the familiar sound of my husband John's dry cough used to be. A week had passed since we buried him, and this house in Richmond, Virginia, our home for 45 years, was now filled with nothing but that silence. It settled on the thin layer of dust on the piano. No one played anymore. It crept into the heavy velvet curtains that blocked out the sun, and it clung to me like an invisible cloak. I was sitting in John's favorite leather armchair. The leather was worn soft and familiar under my hands, and it still faintly smelled of him, a mix of old newsprint from the papers he read every morning, and the lingering scent of pipe tobacco he'd given up long ago but somehow never quite escaped. Everything in this living room was a memory of him. The tall grandfather clock in the corner, a 25th anniversary gift. Its ticking now sounded so lonely, each tick a hammer blow against the quiet, counting out the seconds of my new, widowed life. Across from me, on the modern sofa he'd bought for himself, sat Michael, our only son. At 40 years old, Michael was a carbon copy of his father in his youth, dark hair, a square jaw, a tall frame. But that's where the similarities ended. Where John had a warmth, even if it was sometimes hidden under a stern exterior, Michael radiated a coldness, a calculation that sent a chill down my spine. He was wearing an expensive, perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, too perfect, too new for a son in his week of mourning. He didn't look like he was grieving. He looked like he was heading to a high-stakes board meeting. The silence between us was even heavier than the silence of the house. It was filled with unspoken words, years of distance, and a disappointment that, as a mother, I never wanted to admit to. Michael wasn't looking at me. His eyes were glued to the smartphone in his hand, his thumb swiping rapidly across the screen. Every so often, he'd glance at the glittering Rolex on his wrist, a clear gesture of impatience. He wasn't here to comfort his widowed mother. He was here for something else. He was waiting for the lawyer, waiting for the will. I knew it. During John's final days, as he lay in bed, frail and in pain, Michael only stopped by a few times. The visits were short, perfunctory. He'd stand at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, asking cliché questions about his father's health, but his eyes would always scan the room, as if he were appraising everything. He asked about insurance policies, about business papers, about the arrangements for after his father passed. John, as tired as he was sharp enough to see it. One evening, after Michael had left, he took my hand, his weary eyes meeting mine, and whispered, "Sarah, that boy only cares about the bottom line." At the time, I tried to defend him. "Don't say that, dear," I said. "He's just worried." But deep down, I knew John was right. The son I had once held in my arms, the little boy with bright eyes who always sought my approval, was long gone. In his place was a man whose ambition had consumed his heart. He saw his father's legacy not as memories or love, but as a jackpot he was about to hit. The doorbell rang, cutting through my thoughts. It was jarringly loud in the empty house. Michael shot up immediately, his eagerness undisguised. He went to open it before I could even get to my feet. I heard his low voice in the hall, then footsteps. Michael returned to the living room, followed by Mr. Abernathy, our family lawyer for over 20 years. Mr. Abernathy was a short, balding man with thick glasses and a perpetually sad expression, as if he carried the weight of all the secrets and tragedies he'd witnessed. He wore an old-fashioned dark brown suit and carried a worn leather briefcase. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice quiet and sympathetic, My deepest condolences for your loss. John was a good friend." "Thank you, David," I replied, my voice hoarse. Michael wasted no time on pleasantries. "Shall we get started, Mr. Abernathy?" he asked, gesturing toward the mahogany coffee table. "We don't have all day." I flinched at his rudeness. A brief frown flickered across Mr. Abernathy's face before it was quickly replaced by his usual professional mask. "Of course, Michael." The lawyer placed his briefcase on the table, and the metal clasps clicked open snap, snap in the quiet room. To me, it sounded like opening Pandora's box. I had a bad feeling, a cold dread crawling up my spine that had nothing to do with the grief for John. This was a different kind of fear, something new and alarming. Mr. Abernathy pulled out a thick document, tied with a blue ribbon. He put on his glasses, cleared his throat, and began. "We are gathered here today to announce the contents of the last will and testament of Jonathan Edward Miller, executed and signed on the 15th day of June, 2023, being of sound mind and not under any duress." I clasped my hands together in my lap. My heart was pounding. I didn't care about the money. I had lived a comfortable life with John, but I was never a materialistic woman. All I wanted was peace, to live out my remaining years in this house filled with our memories. I had assumed, naively, that this was a given. I was his wife, his partner, his caregiver in his final days. Michael sat up straighter on the sofa, leaning forward slightly, like a predator poised to strike. His entire being seemed focused on the words about to be spoken, on the numbers about to be revealed. His gaze wasn't on the photos of his father on the mantelpiece, but rather it swept over the furniture, the oil painting by a local artist that John had loved, like an appraiser calculating the value of a lot. In that moment, I looked at my son and felt like I was looking at a complete stranger. Where was the child whose first steps I had guided? The one I stayed up all night with when he had a fever? The one who made me cry with pride on his graduation day? Who was this greedy, heartless man sitting before me? I started to wonder, where did I go wrong? Did I spoil him too much? Or was it John, with his strictness and high expectations, who had accidentally pushed him down a path where material success was the only thing that mattered? John always used to say, "A man is measured by what he builds." Maybe Michael took him too literally. He thought building only meant money and assets, not a family, not a legacy of love and kindness. My mind drifted. I remembered the early years of our marriage. We didn't have much, just a small apartment and big dreams. John worked tirelessly, and I was right there beside him, supporting him, building our family. We built all of this together. Every brick in this house, every item in it, was soaked in our sweat, our tears, and our laughter. How could it belong to just one person? Mr. Abernathy started reading the first provisions, small bequests to charities John supported, gifts for a few old friends. Every word he spoke fell into the heavy silence of the room. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and quick. I glanced at Michael. He was tapping his fingers on his knee, a nervous habit he'd had since he was a boy whenever he grew impatient. The storm hadn't hit yet. The sky outside was, ironically, a brilliant blue. But inside this room, the air had grown thick, heavy with anticipation, and a nameless dread. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. The grandfather clock kept ticking, steady and indifferent, as if it had no idea that my entire life was about to be turned upside down. The storm was still silent, but I could feel it gathering its strength, ready to sweep through and destroy everything I had ever known. And I, a 72-year-old widow, was completely unprepared to face it. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat, and the small sound was like a starting gun in the tense room. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes fixed on the paper in front of him, avoiding eye contact with either me or Michael. I got the feeling he knew what was coming, and he didn't want to be the one to deliver the news. "Under Article 4 of the will," he began, his voice a flat, emotionless monotone, a defense mechanism for those who deal in other people's tragedies. "I, Jonathan Edward Miller, do bequeath my entire portfolio of stocks and bonds, currently managed by Merrill Lynch, to my only son, Michael John Miller." A small, almost inaudible breath escaped from Michael. It wasn't a sigh of relief, but a sound of confirmation, of victory. I saw his shoulders relax just a fraction, the tension in his posture melting away, replaced by an almost tangible smugness. He shot a quick glance my way, a fleeting look that held no shared joy, only triumph. It was as if to say, "See? I knew it." I said nothing. John had built that portfolio over decades. There were nights he stayed up, studying the markets, worrying over downturns. I was there making him coffee, listening to his concerns. It was his life's work, and now it was Michael's. That made sense, I told myself. Michael was his son, his heir. Mr. Abernathy continued, his voice seeming to get quieter. Under Article 5, all savings accounts, checking accounts, and certificates of deposit held at Bank of America shall also be transferred to my son, Michael John Miller. This time, a barely perceptible smile touched Michael's lips. A thin, cold smile. He began to tap his fingers on the expensive alligator briefcase on his lap, a rhythm of smug impatience. He wanted the rest, the biggest piece. My heart began to beat harder. The initial chill had now become a solid block of ice in my chest. This house. It was the only thing I truly cared about. It wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was my life. "And finally," Mr. Abernathy said, pausing for a fraction of a second, as if to steel himself, "under Article 6, I bequeath our home at 1922 Sterling Avenue, Richmond, Virginia, along with all its furniture, fixtures, and artwork within, to my son, Michael John Miller." The block of ice in my chest shattered, leaving a painful, hollow void. The air was sucked out of my lungs. I stared at Mr. Abernathy, hoping I had heard him wrong. But his sad, apologetic face confirmed it all. I turned to look at Michael, and that's when I saw the complete transformation. His calm, professional facade was gone. In its place was a wide, unconcealed grin. His eyes lit up with a light I had never seen before, a look of pure, unadulterated greed. He leaned back into the sofa, crossing his arms over his chest, the posture of a king who had just been crowned. He had it all. His father's entire kingdom. My throat felt dry. I wanted to say something, but no words would come out. I just sat there, stunned into silence, feeling like an unwelcome guest in my own home. Is there anything else, David?" I managed to ask, my voice cracking. Mr. Abernathy flipped to the very last page, a thin slip of paper stapled to the back. He looked at it for a long moment before reading. "There is a small addendum, Mrs. Miller. For you." A tiny, feeble spark of hope ignited within me. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe this was some complex arrangement I didn't understand. The lawyer read, his voice now almost a whisper. "And to my beloved wife Sarah, who stood by me through thick and thin, I leave the sum of $250 and a hint. Storage unit number 46 at Patriot Self Storage. $250 and a hint." The silence that fell over the room was absolute. This time, it wasn't heavy. It was the silence of absurdity, of something so nonsensical it couldn't be real. I looked from Mr. Abernathy to Michael, my brain struggling to process the words. A hint about a storage unit? And then it happened. Michael laughed. It wasn't a chuckle or a giggle. It was a harsh, ugly, barking laugh that echoed through the room. He threw his head back and roared, a sound of pure, wicked amusement, as if he had just heard the funniest joke in the world. His laughter was like shards of glass, cutting at my ears, at my heart. He was laughing at my confusion, laughing at the final legacy his father had left me. Mr. Abernathy looked horrified. He hastily gathered his papers, stuffing them messily back into his briefcase. "My work here is done," he said, getting to his feet. "I will forward you the necessary paperwork to begin the transfer of assets, Michael. Mrs. Miller," he turned to me, his eyes full of genuine pity, "if you need anything." "She won't need anything," Michael cut in, still catching his breath from laughing. "She's got her treasure trove." Mr. Abernathy said no more. He gave me a weak nod and left quickly, as if fleeing the toxic atmosphere in the room. The sound of the front door closing behind him was like a final gunshot. And now, it was just the two of us, me and my son. Or rather, me and the stranger who was wearing my son's face. The amusement vanished from Michael's face as quickly as it had appeared. He stood up, his tall frame casting a shadow over me. The smile was gone, replaced by a cold, cruel mask. "All right," he said, his tone that of a CEO giving an order to an underling. "The show's over. I want you to pack your things and get out." What? I stammered, still reeling. "Michael, what are you talking about? This is my home." "No," he said, his voice sharp as a knife. "It was. Now it's mine. The will was perfectly clear." "But I know." I tried to reason, trying to find a flicker of humanity in his eyes. "But I need time. Where will I go? You can't just throw me out like this." "I can and I will," he replied without a shred of hesitation. "You've got $250. That's enough for a week in some rundown motel room. After that, you're on your own." Tears began to well up, hot and bitter. "Michael, please," I begged, my voice trembling. "Just give me a few days. Just a few days to get my bearings, to find somewhere to go. Your father just died. We're family." The word family seemed to ignite his rage. His face flushed a dark red. "Family? You dare talk about family? You think I don't know what you were doing?" Always whispering in his ear, trying to turn him against me, trying to convince him my investments were too risky. "I was only worried about your father," I cried, a sob catching in my throat. "It was his life savings." "It was jealousy," he roared, taking a step toward me. "You never believed in me. My father, he finally saw you for what you are. That's why he left you exactly what you deserve. $250 and a locker full of junk. You deserve that trash, you stinking old woman." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. Stinking. My son called me stinking. The pain was so immense it nearly paralyzed me. But then, something else rose up from deep inside me, a flicker of anger, a final, defiant spark of self-respect. "You will not speak to me that way," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "I am your mother." That seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back. Something inside his eyes just snapped. "You are not my mother anymore," he hissed. And then, he started moving. He stormed over to the small cabinet beside the fireplace where I kept our family photo albums. He yanked the drawer open and pulled out my most treasured one, the blue velvet album that held all his childhood pictures. He marched to the front door and hurled it onto the porch. I heard a dry thud as it landed on the stone steps. "No!" I screamed, trying to get to my feet. But he was already back, a whirlwind of fury. He ran upstairs, and I heard things being overturned, the sound of closet doors being ripped open. Seconds later, he came back down, dragging 2 of my suitcases, the ones John and I had used on our travels. He didn't even bother to close them. He just dragged them across the hardwood floors, leaving long, ugly scratches, and then heaved them out the door with a loud crash. My clothes, my personal things, spilled out all over the porch. The wool shawl I'd been in the middle of knitting tumbled down a step, the ball of sky blue yarn unraveling until it came to a stop in the dirt. I just stood there, stunned, horrified, unable to move. This wasn't real. This couldn't be my son. This was a nightmare. He turned back to me, his face red from anger and exertion. He pointed a shaking finger at the door. "Get out!" he screamed at me, spit flying from his lips. "Get out, you stinking old woman!" I looked at his face, twisted with rage, and in that moment, a cold, clear truth took shape in my mind. A truth more painful than the insults, more painful than him throwing my life out onto the porch. My son was dead. The man standing before me, panting with his eyes full of hate, was not the Michael I had given birth to and raised. My beloved boy was gone, had probably been gone for a long time, and I had been too blind to see it. This was just a stranger, a greedy monster who had taken over his body. There were no more tears. The pain had hardened into a cold stone in my heart. I had nothing left to say to this person. No plea could reach a heart that was already empty. Slowly, I turned around. I walked across the threshold and out onto the porch, without looking back. I stepped past the broken pieces of my life, my mother's silver comb, a shattered picture frame with a photo of John and me on our wedding day, the clothes I had worn on our happiest occasions. I heard the door slam shut behind me. The deadbolt clicked into place. I stood there alone on the porch, in the wreckage of my past, with the Richmond sky above me and a betrayal so deep it settled in my bones. I don't know how long I stood there on the cold slate porch. Time seemed to stop, then stretch in a bizarre way. Everything around me became painfully sharp. I could see the tiny cracks in the steps where moss was beginning to grow. I could see how the afternoon sun filtered through the leaves of the old oak tree out front, making dancing spots of light on my scattered clothes, as if it were mocking my tragedy. Ours was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where everyone knows everyone, or at least pretends to. I could feel the eyes on me. A curtain in the house across the street twitched. A man walking his dog suddenly slowed his pace, his gaze a mixture of curiosity and pity. I felt my cheeks flush with shame. Sarah Miller, wife of the respectable businessman John Miller, was now a curbside drama, a piece of gossip for the neighbor's dinner table. That shame, it was stronger than the grief. It was a fire that burned through my numbness, forcing me to move. I couldn't just stand here forever. I couldn't give Michael the satisfaction of seeing me broken on his doorstep. With a cold resolve, I began to pick up the pieces. I kneeled, my old knees creaking on the stone. I picked up the broken picture frame. The glass was cracked into a spiderweb, shattering the smiling faces of my younger self and John into 100 tiny fragments. I carefully pried the photo out, smoothed its creases, and tucked it into my coat pocket. The last intact piece of my marriage. I folded my clothes, trying not to look at them, not to let the memories flood in. The silk dress I wore for our 40th anniversary. The sweater Michael had given me for a long-ago Christmas, before his heart had turned to stone. I packed them mechanically, stuffing them back into the open suitcases, the ball of sky-blue yarn. I picked it up, dusting off the dirt. My hands still remembered the rhythmic motion of knitting, a habit that had gotten me through so many worried nights. Now, here it was, lying in the filth. Once everything I could fit was back in the suitcases, I sat on the steps, exhausted. I had to go somewhere, but where? I had friends, but my pride wouldn't let me show up on their doorstep like this, a penniless refugee. And then, the words from the will echoed in my head. Storage unit number 46 at Patriot Self-Storage. It was like a single, thin thread in a hurricane, a destination, a purpose however vague and possibly meaningless. John wasn't a sentimental man. He was practical to a fault. If he left that hint, it had to be for a reason. Maybe there was something in that locker. Some cash he'd stashed away? Important papers? Or maybe it was just a pile of worthless junk, one last joke from beyond the grave. I didn't know, but right then, I had no other choice but to cling to that thread. I pulled out my old cell phone, its screen webbed with a few cracks. I looked up the number for a local taxi service. When the dispatcher answered, my voice was raspy and foreign even to my own ears. I need a cab to 1922 Sterling Avenue. The familiar yellow cab pulled up a few minutes later. The driver was a kind-faced, middle-aged man with a potbelly and a tired smile. He got out to help me with the suitcases. He looked at the mess on the porch, then at me, his eyes full of undisguised curiosity. "Moving day, ma'am?" he asked, trying to be polite. "Something like that," I replied, my voice flat. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want his pity. He loaded the suitcases into the trunk. I got into the back seat, onto the worn vinyl. As the car pulled away, I glanced out the window for one last look at my home. The afternoon sun made the glass panes blaze with light, as if the house were trying to look cheerful. But to me, it was just a hollow shell, a tomb for my former life. I turned my head and didn't look back. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror. I took a deep breath. "Patriot Self-Storage, on Midlothian Turnpike." He nodded. "Got it. Dropping some things off?" "Going to find my fortune," I whispered, but soft enough that he couldn't hear. The ride seemed to take forever. We passed familiar neighborhoods, parks where Michael used to play, restaurants where John and I had our date nights. Every street corner was another twist of the knife in my memory. I closed my eyes, trying to hold back the tears. Not now. I couldn't fall apart now. Finally, the taxi turned down a service road and pulled up before a tall chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Behind it were rows of identical, soulless metal buildings stretching out under the harsh Sunday. A large, faded red, white, and blue sign that read, "Patriot Self-Storage," seemed like a cruel joke. There was nothing patriotic or freeing about this place. This was where forgotten things came to die. I paid the fare, the cash taking a not insignificant chunk out of my precious $250. The driver unloaded my suitcases, setting them on the crunching gravel, and drove away, leaving me alone in the dusty silence of the storage facility. I dragged my bags toward the office, a small, prefabricated building near the gate. The glass door opened with a little jingle. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. A man sat behind the counter, staring intently at a computer screen. He was about 60, balding, with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. His plastic name tag read, "Frank, Manager." He looked up, his eyes squinting at me over the top of his glasses. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm here about unit number 46. It's rented under the name John Miller." Frank typed a few keys. He frowned. "Miller, unit 46. Ah, here we are." He looked up at me. "And you are?" "Sarah Miller. I was his wife." "I see," he said, though his tone suggested he didn't. He took his glasses off and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Well, Mrs. Miller, there's a bit of a problem with this unit." "What kind of problem?" I asked, my heart sinking. "The rent is 6 months past due," he said bluntly. "According to our policy, after 3 months of non-payment, the contents are sealed and scheduled for auction to cover the costs." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Auctioned? You mean it's already been sold?" "Not yet," he said, and that fragile hope flickered again. "The auction for this lot is scheduled for, well, late this afternoon. In fact, it's happening right about now." He glanced at a clock on the wall. "We just do a small, on-site auction for the abandoned units. So, what do I do?" Frank sighed, the sigh of a man who'd had to explain this too many times. "You've got 2 options, ma'am. You can let it go to auction, or you can pay the full back rent plus all the late fees and auction fees to reclaim the property. Basically, you'd be buying it back." "How much would that be?" I asked, barely daring to breathe. He typed on his keyboard again. He mumbled numbers to himself. 6 months rent, late fees, lot cutting fee, auction listing fee, comes to a grand total of... He paused, looked at the number on the screen, then looked at me with a flicker of surprise. "Well, what do you know? That's a coincidence." "How much?" I urged. He turned the monitor toward me. A single number glowed in green. 250美元. I stared at the number. $250, to the penny. And that's when I understood. This wasn't a coincidence. This was John's final joke. A cruel, twisted joke, perfectly orchestrated from beyond the grave. He hadn't left me the storage unit. He'd left me a riddle, a test, a gamble. He gave me the exact amount of money needed to buy back something of completely unknown value. Was he testing me? Or was he mocking me? I would never know. All the strength went out of me. I had to lean on the counter to keep from collapsing. Frank looked at me with concern. "Ma'am, you okay?" I didn't answer. I opened my purse. Inside were the crisp bills Mr. Abernathy had given me. With a trembling hand, I counted out 2 $100 bills, 2 20s, and a 10. I laid them on the counter. My entire worldly fortune. My entire inheritance. I'll buy it," I whispered. Frank looked at the bills, then back at me. For a moment, I thought he might refuse, that he might tell me to keep my meager funds. But he just gave a slow nod, took the money, and handed me a receipt along with a heavy old-fashioned brass key and a round padlock. "She's all yours," he said. "Unit 46 is in row C." I took the key. It felt cold and heavy in my palm. I turned and walked out of the office like I was in a dream. I found row C, and there it was, number 46. A faded blue metal roll-up door, rusted at the corners. I stood in front of it. This was it, my final gamble. Behind this door could be an answer, or it could just be a dusty, empty void, the final confirmation of my failure. The weight of it all, Michael's betrayal, John's cruel joke, the humiliation, the loneliness, it all came crashing down on me at once. I just couldn't take it anymore. My legs gave out from under me. I slid down the cold metal wall and crumpled onto the gravel. And I started to cry. Not quiet, dignified tears, but deep, ragged sobs that shook my entire body. I buried my head in my knees, and just let the pain pour out of me, unchecked. I cried for the husband I had lost. I cried for the son who had become a monster, and I cried for myself, a 72-year-old woman all alone, flat broke, sobbing in front of a dusty storage locker. I don't know how long I sat there. The sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and purple, but I didn't notice. In my world, there was only the gray color of despair. But then, somewhere in the middle of the sobs, a thought cut through. I couldn't give up here. If I gave up, Michael would win. John, with his twisted joke, would win too. I couldn't let that happen. I needed help. I couldn't do this alone. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone again. The screen was blurry through my tears. I scrolled through my contacts, past the names of social acquaintances, old friends I hadn't spoken to in ages, and then I stopped on one name. Diane Thompson. My best friend, the friend who had been by my side since college, the one who had kept my secrets, wiped my tears, and laughed with me until our sides ached. Diane was a widow too. She would understand. I pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. I almost hung up, thinking I shouldn't bother her. But then there was a click, and her familiar warm voice came on the line. "Sarah, what's wrong, honey?" I opened my mouth to answer, but all that came out was another sob. "Sarah? Where are you? Are you all right?" Diane's voice was filled with alarm. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. "Diane," I whispered, my voice thick and raw. Can you come? I need you." I gave her the address. She didn't ask another question, just a firm, steady reply. "Don't you move a muscle. I'm on my way." After I hung up, I just sat there on the cold gravel. But something had changed. I was still alone, but I wasn't lonely anymore. I had bet everything I had on a rusty metal door. And now, I was waiting for the one person in the world I trusted to help me open it. The sun had completely dipped below the metal rooftops of the storage units, leaving a faint purple-orange glow on the horizon. The evening chill began to seep through my thin coat. I was still sitting there, my back against the cold metal door, the sobs having stopped but the ache remaining. With every car that passed on the Midlothian Turnpike, I'd lift my head, hoping. And then, I saw it. A familiar beige Buick LeSabre turning into the facility's gate. The car was old but meticulously kept, just like its owner. Diane never drove fast. She was always careful, deliberate. The car pulled to a stop a few yards from me, its headlights sweeping across me, making me squint. The driver's door opened, and Diane got out. At 70, Diane still had a quiet elegance about her. Her silver hair was cut in a neat bob, and she was wearing a pair of navy slacks and a cream-colored sweater, simple but tasteful. The first thing I noticed was what she was carrying, not a purse or a phone. It was a large thermos and 2 paper cups. She didn't say a single word. She walked quickly toward me, her hazel eyes filled with a mixture of worry and love. She set the thermos down, then knelt on one knee in the gravel right beside me, ignoring her expensive slacks. And then she wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't a polite hug. It was a real, tight, mother bear hug, the kind that says, "I've got you." I buried my face in her shoulder, breathing in her familiar lavender scent, and started to cry again. But this time, the tears weren't bitter. They were tears of relief, of finally finding a safe harbor. Okay, it's all right," Diane whispered, patting my back. "I'm here now. It's all going to be okay." We stayed like that for a long while, in the silence of the storage facility. Finally, when my tears subsided, Diane gently pulled back, looking me straight in the eye. "Now," she said, her voice firm, "you tell me everything." And I did. I told her everything. About the will reading, about Michael's words, his cruel actions, about the $250 and the hint about the locker, about John's bitter joke. I talked, and Diane listened quietly, squeezing my hand from time to time. She didn't interrupt, she didn't judge. She was just there, completely present, sharing the burden with me. When I finished, Diane let out a long, slow breath, a puff of indignant air. "That little monster," she said, and I knew she was talking about Michael. I never did trust him. Even as a boy, he had calculating eyes. And John, Well, John was always John, a complicated man. Maybe this wasn't a joke, Sarah. Maybe this was the only way he could think of to give you something Michael couldn't get his hands on. That was a thought that hadn't occurred to me. Could it be? Could there be a complex, protective motive behind the cruelty? I didn't know, and I probably never would. But in that moment, Diane's idea gave me a small piece of comfort. Diane stood up, brushing the dust from her slacks. "All right," she said, her voice full of energy. "Sitting here feeling sorry for ourselves isn't going to fix anything. We're here for this locker. Let's get some coffee in you to warm you up, and then we're going to see what Jonathan Miller left you." She poured coffee from the thermos into the 2 cups. The steam and the rich aroma filled the cold air. I took the cup in both hands, letting the warmth seep into my frozen fingers. The coffee was strong and sweet, just the way I liked it. Diane always remembered little things like that. "Thank you, Diane," I said, my voice still hoarse. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "Oh, hush," she said, waving it away. "It's what friends are for. Now let's see that key. Let's find out if your gamble paid off." I handed her the brass key and the lock. Together, we stood before the blue metal door of Unit 46. It looked even bigger and more imposing in the dark, lit only by a single security light in the distance. The nervousness and fear came rushing back. What if it was just a pile of junk? What if this gamble was a losing one? Diane seemed to read my mind. "Hey," she said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Whatever is in there, we face it together. You are not alone." She slid the lock into place, the click of metal sounding loud in the quiet. She used both hands to turn it. The lock sprang open with a loud clack. "All right, here comes the hard part," Diane said, looking at the handle at the bottom of the roll-up door. "Let's pull together, on 3. 1, 2, 3. Together, we put all our weight into it, pulling the door up. It was incredibly heavy, and the rusted wheels screamed in protest, a screeching sound like we were waking some long-dormant beast. The door slowly groaned upwards, revealing a pitch-black space inside. A wave of stale, musty air rolled out, carrying the smell of dust, old paper, and forgotten time. The smell of things left behind. Diane pulled a small but powerful flashlight from her handbag. She was always prepared. She flicked it on, and a beam of white light cut through the darkness. And we saw them. My heart stopped. The unit wasn't filled with boxes or old furniture. The entire space, from floor to ceiling, was packed with black, industrial-sized trash bags. Dozens, maybe hundreds of them, were piled haphazardly on top of each other, a few on the top ripped, revealing something that looked like fabric. Disappointment hit me, cold and bitter. Michael had been right. It was a locker full of trash, a joke of the cruelest possible kind. "Oh, Sarah," Diane whispered, her voice full of sympathy. Her flashlight beam swept over the bags, as if searching for a sign, anything other than garbage. I felt the tears start to well up again. I had been so stupid to hope. I had bet everything I had on a pile of trash. "Wait a minute," Diane said suddenly, her voice sharp with something new. "Look closer." She aimed the flashlight at one of the bags nearest the door. It was tied very neatly with a specific kind of drawstring, and it wasn't soft or lumpy like a normal bag of trash. It had a definite, firm shape. "This doesn't feel like trash," she said, her voice full of suspicion. "You don't pack trash this carefully. Hand me the box cutter from my purse." I fumbled in Diane's large handbag and found a small, red box cutter. I handed it to her, my heart starting to pound again, this time with a nervous, hesitant flutter. Diane knelt in front of the nearest bag. She carefully sliced a long line down its side, keeping the blade shallow. The sound of the plastic tearing was sharp and clean. She used her hands to pull the 2 sides of the cut apart, and the beam of the flashlight shined inside. For a moment, neither of us breathed. The first thing we saw was a color, a deep, luxurious red. It was the texture of soft cashmere. Diane reached in and gently pulled it out. It was a cashmere coat, a classic, elegant design. It was perfectly folded, and dangling from the sleeve was a paper tag, a Burberry tag. Next to it was a price tag, $1,800. My mouth fell open. Diane looked at me, her eyes wide in the flashlight beam. "Sarah," she whispered, "this isn't trash. As if in a trance, she reached into the bag again. This time, she pulled out something made of leather. It was soft, with that distinct, rich smell of high-quality, genuine leather. It was a handbag, a black Fendi Peekaboo, with gleaming gold hardware. Inside, it was still stuffed with tissue paper to hold its shape. "Oh, my sweet lord," I breathed. My exhaustion and disappointment vanished, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. We pulled that first bag out into the dim light of the storage facility. Underneath the coat and the handbag were more clothes, all designer, all meticulously folded. A silk Diane von Furstenberg dress, a pair of Giorgio Armani trousers, a Chloe blouse. We looked at each other, then at the mountain of black bags in front of us. A whole unit full of this. "Diane," I said, my voice trembling with excitement, We have to open another one." We didn't need to say more. We set to work like two schoolgirls who had just discovered a thrilling secret. We pulled out another bag, a heavier one. Diane sliced it open. This time, it was full of boxes. Shoe boxes. We opened the first one. A pair of royal blue satin Manolo Blahnik pumps, with the glittering silver buckle on the toe. Brand new, not a scuff on the soles. The next box, a pair of Stuart Weitzman leather boots. The next, a pair of Todd's driving loafers. Hope was no longer a flicker. It was a roaring bonfire, warming my frozen soul. This wasn't a locker full of trash. This wasn't a joke. This was a treasure chest, a forgotten trove, carefully packaged in the perfect disguise. We worked non-stop, forgetting the time, forgetting the cold. We opened bag after bag. One was filled with Hermes silk scarves, each one rolled in place just so. Another held jewelry, not diamonds and gold, but high-end costume jewelry from Chanel and Oscar de la Renta, all in their original boxes. We sat in the growing pile of riches, lit only by the flashlight beam. We were surrounded by names I had only ever seen in fashion magazines. We laughed, unstoppable giggles of relief, of disbelief, of pure, unadulterated joy. "Sarah, do you realize what this is?" Diane said, holding up a sparkling Chanel pearl necklace. "This isn't just a lucky break. This is an inventory. This is a business waiting to happen." And I did. John, in his own strange, convoluted way, hadn't just left me an escape hatch. He had left me a new beginning, a chance to rebuild my life from the ground up, on my own terms. We didn't leave the storage unit that night. We just locked the door from the inside, sat on the unopened bags, finished the coffee, and started to make a plan. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a survivor. And maybe, just maybe, I was about to become a winner. The light at the end of the tunnel had appeared, and it wasn't a flicker. It was the brilliant gleam of buried treasure. Dawn at a storage facility isn't a poetic sight. The first light of day was just a weak gray smear that filtered under the roll-up door, turning the black bags a dull, flat color. The air was cold and damp, but we didn't feel it. The adrenaline and excitement had kept us warm all night. We had only dozed off for a couple of hours, sitting propped up against the bags, our heads on each other's shoulders like two schoolgirls at an impromptu campout. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was Diane's face, looking radiant in the dim light. She was already awake, looking something up on her phone, her lips pursed in concentration. "Good morning, business partner," she said, smiling when she saw I was awake. "I was just checking the resale value for a used Fendi Peekaboo in excellent condition. Guess how much?" I shook my head, my mind still foggy. "A few $100s? "Try again," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Closer to 2,500, and ours is practically brand new." I sat bolt upright. The number was staggering. That one item alone was worth 10 times what I had paid for this entire locker. We were sitting on a gold mine. "We need a plan," I said, feeling a surge of energy I hadn't felt in years. "We can't just sit here and open bags at random. We need to get organized." Diane nodded in agreement. "My thoughts exactly. I've already been sketching out some ideas while you were sleeping." She held up her phone. "Step 1, turn this chaotic locker into a workspace. Step 2, inventory. Step 3, research and pricing. Step 4, plan the sale." And that is exactly what we did. Later that day, Diane drove home and came back with supplies. She brought a folding table, 2 folding chairs, a long string of LED lights that could plug into a power bank, stacks of clear plastic bins, labels, notebooks, and most importantly, a much larger thermos of coffee and a bag of sandwiches. We set to work with a surprising harmony, as if we'd been doing this our whole lives. We cleared a corner of the locker, setting up the table and chairs to create a makeshift headquarters. The LED lights were strung up, illuminating the entire space and chasing away the gloom and the shadows. We set up a system. I would be the excavator. I'd pull out each bag, carefully slice it open, and remove the items inside. Then I'd do a preliminary sort: clothing, handbags, shoes, accessories. Diane would be the archivist and researcher. She'd take the items from me, photograph them with her phone from multiple angles, and log a detailed description in a large ledger: brand name, condition, any notable features. Then she'd carefully place them into clearly labeled plastic bins. As we worked, a clearer picture of the locker's owner began to emerge. It was a woman, definitely. All the clothing was women's, around a US size 8 or 10. She had an exquisite classic taste. She favored luxurious European brands like Chanel, Dior, and Valentino, but there were also elegant pieces from American designers like Oscar de la Renta and Carolina Herrera. She wasn't a blind follower of trends. This was the wardrobe of a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she wanted. The more bags we opened, the more astounded we became. We found a collection of Judith Leiber evening clutches, those little sparkling crystal-covered animals, each one a work of art. We found a box filled with vintage brooches, some signed by famous designers. We even found high-end housewares, a set of Portho linens still in the box, sets of Limoges china wrapped carefully in tissue paper. This woman wasn't just wealthy, Diane remarked as she carefully wiped down a gold-rimmed china plate. She had class. She lived the kind of life we've only ever read about in magazines. But the mystery remained. Who was she? And why would someone with all of this let it be thrown away in a storage unit packaged like garbage? The answer came late on our second day of work. I was wrestling with a particularly heavy bag in the back of the unit. When I cut it open, a faint, musty smell of old paper billowed out. Inside, there were no clothes or accessories. It was filled with cardboard document boxes. I called Diane over. "Look at this." Together, we carefully opened the first box. Inside were neatly organized files, utility bills, bank statements, tax returns, and on the top of each one, a name was clearly printed: Amelia Sterling. She finally had a name, Amelia. It sounded as elegant as her belongings. We started going through the documents, feeling a little guilty, like we were invading someone's privacy, but also irresistibly curious. The papers painted a picture of Amelia Sterling's life. The address on the bills was in Georgetown, one of the wealthiest and most prestigious neighborhoods in Washington, D.C. The bank statements showed figures we could only dream of. But the most interesting part was the tax returns. Her occupation was listed as consultant divided by philanthropic fundraiser. We opened another box. This one was more personal. It was filled with programs from charity galas, invitations to political events, newspaper clippings. Amelia Sterling wasn't just a rich woman. She was a Washington socialite, an influencer. Her name was on the host committees for fundraisers for hospitals, art museums, and political foundations. There were even photographs of her standing next to senators, ambassadors, and even a first lady or two. In one photo, an elegant woman with her platinum hair and a chic updo was smiling and shaking hands with Nancy Reagan. She was wearing a pearl necklace and a sparkling diamond brooch. Diane and I looked at each other. We had seen that brooch. It was sitting in one of our plastic bins. "Oh my God, Sarah," Diane whispered. "This isn't just vintage. This is history." That discovery changed everything. We were no longer just resellers of designer goods. We were now the custodians of a legacy. The responsibility was both thrilling and terrifying. And then, we found the most important box of all. It was made of cedar wood, and when we opened it, a pleasant, aromatic scent filled the air. Inside, there were no documents or clothes. It was lined with blue velvet, and resting on it, arranged with solemn dignity, was a collection of military medals. There were so many. A silver star, a bronze star, a purple heart, the colorful ribbons of various campaigns. They gleamed under the LED light, silent symbols of courage and sacrifice. Beneath them, there was a small engraved brass plate. Colonel George Sterling, United States Army. Amelia had a husband, a war hero. That explained her connections to the political and military world. The two of them must have been a Washington power couple. We sat in silence for a long moment, just staring at the medals. They had a weight to them that was far greater than their physical mass. They represented a life of service, of dangers faced, of comrades lost. "We can't sell these," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It would just be wrong." "I agree," Diane replied. These belong with family, if there's any left." That question hung in the air. Why were these medals, the highest symbols of a soldier's life, abandoned here? What had happened to the Sterlings? The deeper we dug, the more complex the mystery became. We had uncovered a piece of Amelia Sterling's life, a successful high society woman, wife of a hero, but the end of the story, the part that explained why all of this was in a dusty storage unit, was still shrouded in darkness. At the end of that day, as we locked up the unit, the feeling was completely different from the day before. The excitement over the monetary value had given way to a sense of reverence and profound responsibility. We hadn't just found a treasure, we had been entrusted with a story, a legacy, and we knew that our job now was not just to sell these items. It was to find the truth, to honor the lives of Amelia and George Sterling, and maybe, just maybe, to put what was left of their world back where it belonged. The following days in Unit 46 passed in a blur of organized activity. The initial chaos was replaced by a neat and tidy order. The clear plastic bins were stacked into makeshift walls, each one carefully labeled evening gowns, Chanel, Dior, handbags, leather, shoes size 8.5. Our little headquarters with the folding table and chairs had become the command center of this new universe. We worked from early morning until late at night, breaking only for the sandwiches Diane brought and coffee from the seemingly bottomless thermos. The weather in Richmond had turned dreary. Gray skies and a persistent drizzling rain tapped a constant rhythm on the metal roof of the storage unit, but inside, it didn't feel gloomy at all. We were busy excavating a lost kingdom. Every item we pulled from a black bag was a story, another piece in the puzzle of Amelia Sterling's life. But the more we organized, the more I felt something was missing. We had the facts, her name, her profession, her social standing. We had the objects, the proof of her taste and wealth. But we didn't have the person. What were her feelings, her thoughts, her pain? Why did this tragedy happen? The question circled in my mind, even as my hands were busy folding a Hermes silk scarf. One drizzly afternoon, when we were about 2/3 of the way through the bags, I got to the very back corner of the unit. There, tucked behind a stack of bags filled with crystal Christmas ornaments, was one last bag. It was different from the others. It wasn't bulging with clothes or rigid with boxes. It felt heavy, dense, and somehow softer. It had an aura of intimacy about it. "Diane, come look at this," I called out, a hint of excitement in my voice. "I think this one is different." Diane came over, a soft cloth in her hand from polishing a silver clutch. She shone her flashlight on the bag I was pointing to. "It does look more personal," she agreed. I made a careful incision with the utility knife. This time, no clothes or accessories emerged. Instead, there were heavy, leather-bound objects. I reached in and gently pulled out the first one. It was a large photo album, bound in faded burgundy leather. We opened it. The black paper pages were filled with yellowing black and white photographs. A young Amelia with a bouffant hairdo and a radiant smile. A handsome young soldier in his dress uniform, undoubtedly George. Their wedding, the births of their children, vacations, picnics. A happy life, captured in silent images. Beneath the album were scrapbooks, filled with clippings about events Amelia had organized, invitations, thank you letters from dignitaries. And then, at the very bottom of the bag, I found it. It wasn't large, just a medium-sized journal, bound in soft, navy blue leather. The corners were worn, and a matching silk ribbon served as a bookmark. There was no lock, no title. It was just a book, but I could feel the weight of the secrets it held. "Diane," I whispered. "It's her diary." We looked at each other. This was the missing piece. This was Amelia's voice. "We can't read it here," Diane said, her voice firm. "It doesn't feel right. Let's take it back to your apartment. We'll read it tonight." That evening, we sat in the small living room of my rented apartment. The rain was still coming down outside, a steady drumming against the window pane. We had showered and changed into comfortable clothes. Diane had made a pot of chamomile tea, and its gentle scent filled the room. We sat across from each other on the old sofa, Amelia's diary placed reverently on the coffee table between us, like a sacred relic. "You read," Diane said softly. "You found it." With slightly trembling hands, I picked up the journal. The leather felt soft and cool. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting inside was beautiful, an elegant sloping script in blue ink. May 10th, 2017. It has been 1 year since George is gone. They say time heals all wounds, but they lie. Time just makes the emptiness longer. This house is too big, too quiet without him. Sometimes I still find myself talking to him, telling him about my day, only to realize I'm speaking to an empty room. The children, Jonathan and Elizabeth, they call, but they are busy with their own lives. They don't understand. No one can understand what it's like to lose half of your own soul. I looked up at Diane. She was a widow, too. In her eyes, I saw a deep and knowing sympathy. I read on. The diary spanned several years. The first entries were filled with the grief and loneliness of a widow. Amelia wrote about her memories of George, their love, the struggles they had overcome together. But then, the tone began to shift. A new, unsettling note began to creep in. September 21st, 2018. A strange thing happened today. I was driving to the grocery store, the same one I have shopped at weekly for 30 years. But when I got to the familiar intersection, I suddenly couldn't remember if I was supposed to turn left or right. Everything looked foreign. I had to pull over, my heart pounding, until a kind policeman asked if I was all right and gave me directions. I lied and said I was new in town. The shame of it. Later, I couldn't find my car keys, though they were right there in my purse. My mind feels like it's playing tricks on me. It's like a house full of fog, and I'm trying to find my way through. As I read, her handwriting was still clear, but there was a faint tremor in it. I turned the pages. The theme of memory loss appeared more and more frequently. She wrote about forgetting the names of old friends, of starting a story and forgetting the point halfway through. And then, the family discord began. March 4th, 2019. Jonathan and Elizabeth came to visit today. Or rather, they came to argue. Jonathan wants me to move into a premier retirement community near him in Virginia. He says it has medical care and security. Elizabeth wants me to sell this house and move to Florida to be near her. She says the warm climate would be good for me. They don't ask what I want. They talk about what's best for me, but what they're really doing is fighting for control. I heard them in the kitchen arguing about money, about who would manage my affairs. I just sat in the living room, pretending not to hear, feeling like a piece of furniture they were appraising. Amelia's handwriting was getting messier now, the letters uneven. July 18th, 2019. They have decided to sell the house. "It's too much to keep up," Jonathan said. "You can't manage on your own anymore." They hired people to clear it out. They are packing my life with George into boxes. The things they don't want, they are simply throwing into black trash bags. I tried to stop them. "No," I said, "that vase was a wedding gift from your aunt." But Elizabeth just said, "Oh, Mother, it's so dated. They don't see the memories. They only see things. All my most precious things, the things I couldn't bear to see sold or thrown away. I have been secretly packing them into the same kind of black bags. I've rented a storage unit. At least there, they will be safe. For now." I had to stop, a lump forming in my throat. I looked at Diane, whose eyes were also glistening with tears. This was the answer. The cruelty hadn't come from a stranger. It came from her own children. I turned toward the end of the journal. The handwriting was now almost illegible, a slanted, spidery scrawl. Date. I don't remember the date. It is cold. Jonathan does not call. Elizabeth does not call. This room is so white. I miss my garden. I miss George. Sometimes I see him standing in the corner smiling at me. He says he is waiting. Did they bring my bags? I don't remember. My treasures. George's medals. The brooch he gave me on our first anniversary. The pictures of the children when they were small, before they became strangers. And then, the very last page. There were only a few lines, written in a shaky, almost childlike hand. I asked a nurse about the bags. She didn't know what I was talking about. Maybe I dreamed it. They are too busy to care. These treasures, our whole life, will they end up abandoned, just like their owner? That was the last entry. After that, the pages were blank. I closed the diary. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the sound of the rain and my own sniffling, and then I wept. I sobbed, uncontrollably. I wasn't just crying for Amelia. I was crying for myself, because I understood. I understood her pain in my very bones, the feeling of being treated like a burden by your own flesh and blood, like trash to be disposed of. Michael's words echoed in my ears, sharp as a razor. "You deserve that trash, you stinking old woman." Amelia Sterling and I, two women from completely different worlds, shared the same tragedy. We had both been cast aside in our moment of greatest vulnerability. We had both been stripped of our dignity by the very people we loved the most. Diane put her arm around me and let me cry on her shoulder. "I know," she whispered. "I know, Sarah." When the tears finally subsided, a different feeling rose up inside me, replacing the grief. It was a cold, steely resolve. This shared pain didn't break me. It forged me. I sat up straight, wiping my eyes. "No," I said, and my voice was steady now. "Her legacy will not be abandoned." I looked at Diane, and in her eyes, I saw my own determination reflected back at me. "We aren't just going to sell these things, Diane," I said. "We're going to do it right. We're going to honor her. We're going to tell her story. And we're going to make sure that what belongs to history, what belongs to honor, is returned to its rightful place. I promise the spirit of Amelia Sterling, I will not let her be forgotten." I didn't sleep that night. I just sat holding Amelia's diary. It wasn't just a journal anymore. It had become a mirror, reflecting both the pain and the strength of women like us. And I knew that my journey now had a much bigger purpose. It wasn't just about saving myself. It was about saving a legacy. After the night we read Amelia's diary, the atmosphere in Unit 46 changed. It was no longer just a workspace. It had become a sanctuary. We no longer looked at the items as merchandise. We saw them as relics, pieces of a venerable life that needed to be cherished. My vow to Amelia gave us a startling clarity. We knew exactly what we had to do. "All right," I said to Diane the next morning, my voice filled with a new energy. "We need to divide our mission. The personal, historical, and honorable items, the medals, the diaries, the photo albums, the key political memorabilia, we set those aside. They are not for sale. Not now, at least. Our job is to preserve them and find a way to return them to where they belong." Diane nodded immediately, her eyes shining. "I agree. I'll start a separate inventory for the legacy collection. We'll put them in the most secure bins we have. The rest of it," I continued, "the clothes, the handbags, the shoes, the housewares, the things Amelia bought to enjoy her life, they will be the foundation of our business. But we won't just sell them, we will tell their stories." And in that moment, our business found its name. "Sterling Legacies," Diane said, as if the name had always been there, just waiting to be spoken. "It's perfect. It honors her, and it speaks to the nature of what we're doing." From that second on, Sterling Legacies was born, not on paper but in our hearts and minds. The next few weeks were a flurry of intense but exhilarating work. We finished the sorting process. One corner of the unit was now dedicated to the legacy collection, the bins carefully sealed as if they contained national treasures. The rest of the space became an efficient production line. I took charge of preparing the items, cleaning, making minor repairs, steaming the silk dresses with a handheld steamer Diane had brought. I had an eye for detail, a skill I'd honed over years of being a wife and mother, but never thought could be a business tool. Diane became our research and marketing guru. She spent hours online, not just finding the value of items, but learning their history. "Sarah, did you know this Chanel brooch is from the 1988 collection, the year that she became a living encyclopedia of vintage fashion?" We decided to start selling on online platforms that specialized in designer and vintage goods, where the buyers were knowledgeable and willing to pay for quality and a story. "Photography is everything, Sarah," Diane declared. "We can't just take pictures of them on the dusty floor." So, we transformed another corner of the unit into a makeshift studio. Diane brought in a large bolt of white velvet for a backdrop and a small set of photography lights. Every item, before being listed, was photographed with professional care. We didn't just shoot the product, we tried to capture its soul. The Fendi bag was placed next to an old leather-bound book. The Hermes scarf was draped artfully on a mannequin we bought at a secondhand store. But our secret weapon was the item description. Instead of just writing, "Valentino silk dress, size 8, good condition," we wrote, "From the estate of a prominent Washington, D.C. socialite, this Valentino silk gown is more than a garment. It's a piece of history. Imagine it gliding through embassy ballrooms, a silent witness to the important conversations that shaped an era. The silk still whispers stories of charity galas and elegant evenings. To own this dress is not just to own a piece of fashion, but to own a legacy." We never revealed Amelia's name, out of respect for her privacy. But we evoked her world, and that made all the difference. The first item we sold was the Fendi Peekaboo bag. We listed it for $2,200, a little under market value to generate interest. Within an hour, it was sold. I remember that moment. We were sitting in the unit, having a late lunch, when Diane's phone chimed. She looked at the screen, and her eyes went wide. "Sarah," she said, her voice full of disbelief. It sold." We jumped up and hugged each other, screaming like two teenage girls. Our shrieks echoed in the quiet facility. It wasn't just about the money, it was validation. Our plan was working. Our story was resonating. The money from the sales started to trickle into a new bank account we opened under the name Sterling Legacies. For the first time since John's death, I felt a sense of financial security. It was a wonderful feeling, like breathing fresh air after being suffocated for a long time. The first thing I did was pay off the small credit card debts I had incurred just to get by. Then, I found and rented a small, clean, 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet complex. It was nothing like the house on Sterling Avenue, but it was mine. It was a safe haven, a place no one could throw me out of. I paid the security deposit and the first month's rent with money I had earned myself. There was no feeling more liberating. Diane, though she had her own home, often stayed over in the second bedroom. My apartment became the second headquarters for Sterling Legacies. By day, we worked at the unit. By night, we sat in my living room, carefully packing orders, writing handwritten thank you notes to every customer, and planning our next steps. My life had completely transformed. I was no longer Sarah Miller, the pitiful widow cast out by her son. I was Sarah Miller, co-founder of Sterling Legacies. I woke up every morning with a purpose. I had a partner I trusted implicitly. I was building something from nothing. The business grew faster than we could have imagined. We developed a following of loyal customers who came back not just for the unique items, but for the story and the care we put into every transaction. We started turning a profit, a modest one at first, but it was growing. But amidst all the busyness and success, the Legacy Collection was always at the back of our minds. It sat in its corner of the unit, a quiet reminder of our true mission. One evening, as we were packing up an Oscar de la Renta brooch, Diane said, "Sarah, it's time." I knew what she was talking about. "I think so too," I replied. We had been doing our research on the political and military memorabilia. We knew that the items we had were priceless, and not just in monetary terms. A brooch that belonged to Pat Nixon, a compact that belonged to Nancy Reagan, they belonged in a museum. Colonel Sterling's medals, they belonged with his family, or at the very least in a respected military archive. "We can't just keep them in the unit forever," Diane said. "They're too important. We have a responsibility to find them a proper home." It was a daunting task. We were just two old women running a small online shop. How were we supposed to get access to the world of museums and high-end collectors? "We start with what we know," I said. "The family. We have to try to find the children, Jonathan and Elizabeth. They deserve to know." And so we began the search. With the information from Amelia's documents, Diane, with her online detective skills, began to follow the trail. It was not going to be easy, but we had a clear objective. As I lay in bed in my new apartment that night, listening to the gentle rain outside, I thought about the irony of it all. Just a few months ago, I had lost everything: my home, my family, my future. Now, I was building a new foundation, one that was so much stronger because it was built with my own hands, my own wits, and my friendship with Diane. Sterling Legacies hadn't just saved me from poverty, it had saved me from despair. It had given me back the dignity I thought I had lost forever. The search for Amelia Sterling's children felt like looking for a needle in a haystack. Elizabeth Sterling, as we'd read in the diary, had wanted her mother to move to Florida. But Florida was a big place, and she had likely married and changed her name. Jonathan had wanted his mother to stay in Virginia, but there were no other details. Diane, with the tenacity of a bloodhound, spent weeks scouring the internet. She searched public records, old news articles, social media sites. She followed the faintest of clues, from the name of a university Jonathan might have attended to the name of a yacht club the Sterlings might have belonged to. Meanwhile, Sterling Legacies continued to grow. We had made enough profit to rent Unit 46 on a long-term lease. It had become our second home. We even got a mini-fridge and a coffee maker, turning it into a real workspace. Our reputation was beginning to spread in the vintage and high-fashion communities. People weren't just buying from us, they were following us for the stories we told. But in the back of my mind, the image of Colonel Sterling's medals in their wooden box and Amelia's diary in my desk drawer was a constant reminder. We had an unfinished mission. One Tuesday afternoon, as I was carefully wrapping a Dior silk scarf for shipping, my phone rang. It was Diane. Her voice was buzzing with unrestrained excitement. "Sarah, I found him!" she exclaimed. "I found Jonathan!" I sank into my chair, my heart hammering. Where? How? "It wasn't easy," Diane explained, her voice full of pride. "I had to trace an old donation Amelia's foundation made to a veterans fund. And on the board of directors for that fund, there was a name, Jonathan Sterling, CEO of Sterling Solutions, a security consulting firm based in Arlington, Virginia. Arlington, near Washington, D.C. It made sense. "Are you sure it's him?" I asked. "Pretty sure. His bio on the company website mentions his family's proud military heritage. It's got to be him, Sarah." My excitement was quickly replaced by a wave of anxiety. Finding him was one thing, contacting him was another. How would he react? Would he think we were scammers trying to extort money from him? Would he be angry that his mother's private life had fallen into the hands of two strangers? That evening, we sat in my apartment, debating our next move. "We can't just call him," I said. "It sounds too suspicious. We need to write a letter, a proper letter." We spent the entire evening drafting it. Every word, every sentence was carefully considered. We didn't want to sound aggressive or greedy. We wanted to convey respect and a desire to do the right thing. In the end, we wrote, "Dear Mr. Jonathan Sterling, please forgive the unsolicited nature of this letter. My name is Sarah Miller, and I am writing to you on a delicate matter concerning your late mother, Mrs. Amelia Sterling. Through a complex set of circumstances, I recently came into possession of the contents of a storage unit formerly rented under your mother's name. Among these items, in addition to commercially valuable goods, was a significant amount of deeply personal memorabilia, including family photo albums, private papers, and most notably, the complete collection of your father's, Colonel George Sterling's military medals. My partner and I believe that these artifacts, especially the Medals of Honor, belong with his family. We have no intention of selling them or profiting from them. Our sole purpose in writing this letter is to find a way to return them to you, should you wish to have them. We understand this may come as a surprising and difficult piece of news. Please take your time. If you would like to discuss this further, you can reach me at the phone number or email address below. Sincerely, Sarah Miller and Diane Thompson, Sterling Legacies." We sent the letter via a certified courier service to ensure it reached Jonathan directly, and then we waited. The next few days passed in a state of nervous anticipation. Every time the phone rang, my heart leaped. Every new email notification made me hold my breath, but there was nothing. A week went by. Then two. Maybe he didn't get the letter, I said to Diane, trying to hide my disappointment. Or maybe he just doesn't care, Diane replied, her voice tinged with bitterness. Just like his mother wrote. The thought was heartbreaking. Was it possible that, after everything, we were the only ones who cared about this legacy? And then, on a Monday morning, 3 weeks after we sent the letter, I received an email. The sender was Jay Sterling. The subject line was a single word, meeting. The body of the email was brief and to the point. Dear Mrs. Miller, I am in receipt of your letter. I would like to meet with you and Mrs. Thompson to discuss this matter. Please let me know what time and place would be convenient for you in Richmond this coming weekend. Regards, Jonathan Sterling. There was no warmth, no curiosity, just cool professionalism, but at least he had replied. We arranged to meet on Saturday afternoon at a small, quiet cafe in Carytown, a neutral location. All week, I felt as nervous as a girl on a first date. What should I say? What should I bring? We shouldn't bring anything too valuable, Diane advised. Just enough to prove we're not making this up. Maybe a few photos and one of the less significant medals. It was a good idea. I chose a few photos from Amelia's album, a wedding picture, a family portrait with Jonathan as a little boy, and I selected a National Defense Service medal, one that most soldiers receive. On Saturday, Diane and I arrived at the cafe half an hour early. I wore a simple but elegant sweater dress. Diane wore a cobalt blue pantsuit. We wanted to look credible, not like two old ladies who had stumbled upon a windfall. At 3 o'clock sharp, a man walked in. I knew instantly it was him. He was in his early 60s, with salt and pepper hair impeccably groomed. He was tall and carried himself with a straight-backed military posture, like George in the old photos. He had Amelia's eyes, but his father's jawline. There was a tired, sad air about him. He scanned the cafe, and his eyes settled on us. He walked toward our table. Mrs. Miller? Mrs. Thompson? He asked, his voice a deep, even baritone. Yes, please, have a seat, Mr. Sterling, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He sat down, declining to order a drink. He got straight to the point. I received your letter. I have to admit it's rather unusual. We know, sir, Diane said. We find the situation highly unusual ourselves. You claim to have my mother's belongings. How can I possibly believe that? This was my cue. I slowly opened my handbag and took out a manila envelope. I pushed it across the table toward him. Perhaps these will help. He looked at me skeptically, then opened the envelope. He pulled out the photographs. I saw his hand freeze when he saw his parents' wedding picture. He stared at it for a long moment, his thumb unconsciously stroking the face of the young Amelia. Then he saw the picture of himself, a grinning, blonde-haired boy on his father's shoulders. Something in his rigid facade seemed to melt. He cleared his throat and put the pictures down. Then he saw the medal. He picked it up, turning it over and over in his fingers. My father had 3 of these, he said, his voice almost a whisper. 1 for World War II, 1 for Korea, and 1 for Vietnam. Silence settled over our table. Finally, he looked up at us, and for the first time, I saw something other than suspicion in his eyes. I saw pain. I owe you an explanation, he began, his voice weary now, and probably an apology. He told us the story, and it matched what we had read in Amelia's diary with agonizing precision. He spoke of his mother's rapid decline after his father's death, the endless arguments with his sister Elizabeth over her care, the sale of the house, the rushed packing of everything into storage. That locker. It became a symbol of our failure, he said, staring out the window. A symbol of our inability to agree on anything. We just kept paying the monthly rent on autopay, telling ourselves we'd deal with it someday, but someday never came. He spoke of Amelia's death in the nursing home, the messy legal disputes over the estate, and how, in the chaos, the automatic payments to the storage unit had lapsed. By the time I realized it was too late, they said it had been auctioned off. He sighed. I assumed everything was lost forever. I was too ashamed to even tell my sister. We're so sorry, I said softly. He turned back to us, a look of gratitude on his face. You could have just sold everything. You had no obligation to find me. Why? It was the question I had been waiting for. Because some things can't be measured in money, Mr. Sterling. Your father served this country. Your mother was a remarkable woman. Their legacy deserves to be respected, not sold off like second-hand goods. I told him about Sterling Legacies, about how we had tried to honor his mother in our business. I didn't tell him about my own situation, about Michael. It wasn't necessary. Jonathan Sterling sat there, the powerful CEO of a successful company, and I saw his eyes glisten. My mother. She would have liked you too, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She always believed in the strength and decency of women. Finally, he composed himself. I want the personal effects back, the diaries, the photos, and especially my father's medals. I will pay you for them. You will pay us nothing, Diane said firmly. This is a debt of honor. We are simply returning it to its rightful owner. He looked at us, a look of stunned respect in his eyes, and then he did something unexpected. He pulled a checkbook and a pen from his jacket pocket. You may not ask, but I can insist, he said. This is not to buy the items. This is from my mother's trust. She had a provision that a portion of her estate be used to support worthy causes that honor the family's legacy. I cannot think of a more worthy cause than what you have done. He wrote out a check, folded it, and pushed it toward me. Please, consider it an investment in Sterling Legacies. My mother would have wanted it. Diane and I looked at each other. Finally, I slowly took the check. I didn't look at the number. I just nodded. Before he left, Jonathan paused. My mother had a piece of jewelry she loved above all others, a sapphire and diamond necklace. It was the last gift my father ever gave her. You didn't happen to see it, did you? I searched my memory of the hundreds of pieces of jewelry we had catalogued. I don't believe so, sir, but we will double-check everything. Thank you, he said. Thank you for everything. After he was gone, Diane and I sat in silence. I slowly unfolded the check. 75,000 美元. My jaw dropped. Diane looked over and nearly spilled her tea. That money wasn't just an investment. It was validation. It was freedom. It was a new beginning for our new beginning. After the meeting with Jonathan Sterling, a sense of peace and completion settled over Diane and me. We had fulfilled our promise. A few days later, Jonathan drove down to Richmond. We met him at Unit 46. It was an incredibly emotional moment. We solemnly handed over the bins containing his family's legacy. When Jonathan opened the cedar box and saw his father's medals, he was silent for a long time, his shoulders shaking slightly. He picked up Amelia's diary and held it to his chest, as if he were hugging his mother herself. I don't know how to thank you, he said, his voice choked. Before he left, he mentioned the sapphire necklace again. We had searched everywhere, re-examining every box and bag, but it was nowhere to be found. Maybe my mother put it somewhere else, Jonathan said, a note of disappointment in his voice. But then he smiled. It's all right. Getting these things back is a miracle in itself. The $75,000 check changed everything for Sterling Legacies. We no longer had to worry about every penny. We had capital to invest. We rented a small space in an upscale shopping district, turning it into a proper showroom and office. We called it the Sterling Legacies Gallery. It wasn't large, but it was elegant, with cream-colored walls, hardwood floors, and warm lighting. Every item was displayed like a piece of art, with a small card telling its story. Our business took off. Jonathan was true to his word. He introduced us to estate lawyers and auctioneers in Washington, D.C. We started getting consulting contracts, helping other families appraise and liquidate their loved ones' estates with dignity and respect. We had become experts in our field. A year passed. My life had found a steady, happy rhythm. My apartment had become a true home, filled with things I loved. I no longer felt like a refugee. I was a businesswoman, a survivor, a person in my own right. The pain over Michael was still there, but it had become a dull scar, not an open wound. I had come to accept that I had lost him for good. And then, on a beautiful Thursday afternoon, the ghost came back. I was in the gallery, helping a client with a vintage brooch, when the bell on the door chimed. I looked up and my heart stopped. Standing in the doorway was Michael. He looked different. The expensive suit was gone. In its place were faded jeans and a worn-looking leather jacket. His hair was a little longer, and there were dark circles under his eyes. The smug, arrogant look had been replaced by something that looked almost like exhaustion, like desperation. Life, it seemed, had not been kind to him over the past year. He looked around the gallery, his eyes wide with disbelief. He took in the gleaming glass cases, the carefully displayed items, the elegantly dressed customers. He looked at me, standing behind the counter, poised and professional. I could see the confusion and utter shock in his eyes. This was not the broken, pathetic old woman he had thrown out onto the street. I politely excused myself from my client and stepped out from behind the counter. I faced him, keeping my expression neutral. "What are you doing here, Michael?" I asked, my voice cool and distant. He blinked, as if waking from a dream. "Mom," he said, and the words sounded strange, out of place. I heard about this place. I couldn't believe it." "Believe what?" "All of this," he said, waving a vague hand. How did you get all this? That locker full of junk." "It wasn't a locker full of junk," I said. "It was a legacy, and I worked hard to honor it." A complex expression flickered across his face: envy, regret, and maybe even a sliver of admiration. He took a step toward me. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet. "I was an idiot. I wasn't thinking. I let greed get the better of me." I just stood there, silent, watching him. This apology, it was too little, too late. It rang hollow. Seeing my lack of response, he pressed on, his tone becoming more urgent. "Things haven't been going well for me, Mom. My investments, they went south. The money, it's almost all gone. I'm in trouble. I was just thinking, maybe you could help me out a little, just to get back on my feet." We're family, after all. Family. There was that word again. The last time he used it, it was to insult me. Now he was using it to beg for a handout. I took a deep breath. I had played this moment over in my mind so many times. I had imagined what I would say, what I would do, and now that it was here, I felt a surprising sense of calm. I looked him straight in the eyes that had once belonged to my son. "My son," I said, my voice steady, without a tremor, "died the day he threw his mother out of her home and called her names. I don't know who you are. You may have his face, but you don't have his heart." I turned to the security guard we had hired, a large, kind man named George, and said clearly, "George, please escort this gentleman out. He is not welcome here." The desperation in Michael's eyes turned to rage. "You can't do this," he shouted. "I'm your son." George stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Michael's shoulder. "Sir, the lady asked you to leave." "You'll regret this," Michael hissed as he was led to the door. "You're a heartless monster." The door closed behind him. The gallery was silent. My client was looking at me with sympathetic eyes. I gave her a reassuring smile. "I do apologize for the interruption. Now, where were we? The brooch, I believe?" That night I told Diane what had happened. She just nodded. "You did the right thing, Sarah." But the story wasn't over. A few days later, Diane called me, her voice furious. "Have you seen the Richmond Chronicle?" The Richmond Chronicle was a local tabloid, known for its sensationalist stories and outright lies. I never read it. "What is it?" I asked. "What is it?" Diane said. "Your darling son is on the front page, with a pathetic-looking photo. The headline reads, 'Millionaire Widow Abandons Her Only Son in His Time of Need.'" I felt the blood rush to my head. That evening, I bought a copy, and there it was, a long, fabricated story. Michael had told them I had come into a mysterious fortune after his father's death, that I had grown cold and heartless, that I had refused to help him in his darkest hour. The worst part was his tone. It wasn't angry, it was forgiving. "I still love my mother," he was quoted as saying. "I know she's been through a lot. I just hope that one day she'll find it in her heart to remember she has a son." It was a vicious, calculated attack. He wasn't just trying to ruin my reputation, he was trying to play the victim, to win public sympathy. I felt a white-hot rage build inside me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call that newspaper and tell them the truth. But then, I looked at Amelia's diary, which sat on my bookshelf. I thought of the dignity she had fought to maintain, even as her mind was failing her. I thought of my vow. Screaming was not the Sterling Legacy's way. The next morning, I called Diane, who is the best media lawyer in Richmond. I didn't get into a mudslinging match with a tabloid. I took a different approach. I hired a public relations firm and a legal team. We didn't sue the Chronicle. That would only drag the story out. Instead, I did something much simpler. I agreed to an exclusive interview with the most reputable and respected newspaper in the state, the Virginia Pilot. I invited them to the gallery. During the interview, I wasn't angry or bitter. I simply told my story, the whole story. I told them about the will reading. I showed them a copy of it, with the $250 entry. I told them about being thrown out of my home. I described Michael's words. I told them about finding Unit 46, about Amelia Sterling, and about how Diane and I built Sterling Legacies from nothing, on a foundation of hard work and respect. I showed them the letter we wrote to Jonathan Sterling and the check he gave us. I didn't badmouth Michael. I didn't call him a monster. I just presented the facts, cold, clear, and undeniable. The article ran on a Sunday, a full 2-page spread in the main section. Its headline was, "A Legacy of Dignity, the True Story Behind Sterling Legacies." It was like a bombshell. The entire city, the entire state, read it. Everyone saw the truth. My business didn't suffer. On the contrary, it exploded. People admired my resilience and integrity. They flocked to the gallery, not just to buy, but to show their support. And Michael, the ghost of my past? The truth incinerated him. His story of greed and filial cruelty went viral. Business partners abandoned him. Friends shunned him. He became a pariah in the very community he had tried so hard to impress. The foundation he had built, one based on money and deceit, crumbled completely. This time there was no one there to help him back up. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a quiet, empty sadness. The ghost had been banished, but the price was the final confirmation that the son I had once loved was truly and utterly gone. After the article in the Virginia Pilot ran, things seemed to settle. The little media storm Michael had created dissipated as quickly as it had appeared, washed away by the tide of truth. Life for Diane and me returned to its familiar rhythm, but with a difference. We were no longer just quiet businesswomen. We had become minor local icons, a story of reinvention and late-life female empowerment. I never sought out information on Michael. I had cut that cord in my mind. But in a town the size of Richmond, news has a way of finding you. Occasionally, I'd hear fragments from old acquaintances, that his company had gone bankrupt, that he'd had to sell the house on Sterling Avenue at a loss to pay off debts, that he'd moved out of Virginia, no one knew where. Each tidbit was a small pang, a reminder of the tragedy, but I had learned how to keep the scars from aching. Several years passed. Sterling Legacies was more than just a shop, it was a brand. We opened a second gallery in Georgetown, in Amelia's old neighborhood, a fitting homecoming. We hired staff, bright, enthusiastic young women who saw us not just as bosses, but as mentors. My life was full of work, friendship, and a deep sense of contentment. Jonathan's check, we never used it for ourselves. We used it to start a small foundation in Amelia's name, dedicated to helping older women in crisis get back on their feet. And then, on a crisp autumn afternoon, about 3 years after Michael had vanished from my life, I saw him again. Diane and I were walking in Maymont Park, a habit of ours on beautiful days. The leaves had turned fiery shades of yellow and red, and the air was clean and cool. We were laughing about something, discussing a collection of Limoges porcelain we had just acquired, when I saw a man sitting on a bench by the water. He was wearing a tattered, grimy jacket, too thin for the cool weather. His dark hair was long, matted, and unkempt. A scruffy beard covered most of his gaunt face. He was hunched over, eating something out of a brown paper bag, shoveling it into his mouth as if he hadn't eaten in days. There was something familiar in his posture, in the way he held his head. Diane saw it too. She squeezed my arm gently. As we walked past, he looked up, perhaps disturbed by our footsteps. Our eyes met. They were Michael's eyes. But they held no greed or anger anymore. They were empty. A frighteningly hollow emptiness, filled only with exhaustion and despair. He recognized me. For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker in those eyes. Shame, shock, and maybe a desperate sliver of hope. He looked like he wanted to say something. his mouth partly open. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. A part of my maternal instinct, a part I thought had long since died, wanted to stop, to ask, to help. But then I saw an image of myself 3 years prior, standing on that cold porch, surrounded by my discarded belongings. I heard his screams, "Get out, you stinking old woman!" I thought of Amelia Sterling, alone in that nursing home while her children bickered over money, and I knew that my pity would do him no good. He had to face the consequences of his own choices. Misplaced kindness can sometimes be crueler than indifference. I took a deep breath. I looked him straight in the eye, my face a mask of neutrality. Not anger, not contempt, just a deep, settled distance, an acceptance that this man was no longer a part of my life. And then I turned away. I kept walking with Diane, leaving him there on the bench with his paper bag and his emptiness. We didn't say a word about it. We didn't have to. As we rounded a grove of trees, I let out a soft sigh. It wasn't a sigh of triumph. It was one of finality. The circle was closed. That was the price of greed. A terrible, steep price. And it was his to pay. Alone. Now, at the age of 75, sitting in my own cozy living room, surrounded by things I love, I often think about that story. It's not a nightmare anymore. It has become a part of me, a hard-won lesson life taught me in the cruelest way. I've learned that a true legacy isn't in what we accumulate, not houses, not stocks, not Fendi bags. A true legacy is what we build in the hearts of others. John left Michael money, and it turned to ash. Amelia left me a chance, and from it, I built a new life, a business, and a foundation that helps others. Which legacy truly endured? I've also learned that forgiveness is a complicated thing. Do I forgive Michael? I don't know. I no longer feel anger. I don't wish him ill, but I cannot forget what he did. Perhaps forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about accepting it and not letting it poison your future. I chose to move on, without the baggage of hatred. That is my forgiveness. My life now is peaceful. Sterling Legacies is still thriving, but Diane and I have stepped back a bit, leaving the day-to-day operations to the young women we've trained. We act as consultants now, the grand dames of the little empire we built. I spend my time on simple joys, tending to my small balcony garden, reading the books I never had time for, walking in the park with Diane. We travel often to the places John and I had dreamed of but never reached. I am living the rest of my life to its absolute fullest. Sometimes I take out Amelia's diary. I don't feel sad when I read it anymore. I feel a profound sense of gratitude. This woman I never met gave me a priceless gift. She gave me a second chance. And by telling her story, I found my own voice again. Oh, and there is one final detail. A small, beautiful end to the tale. About a year ago, while liquidating an estate, we came across an old jewelry box. Inside, there was a hidden compartment. And in that secret compartment, wrapped in a piece of velvet, was an exquisite sapphire and diamond necklace. We knew instantly. It was Amelia's. Perhaps in her confusion, she had accidentally included it in a box of items she had donated to charity long ago. We contacted Jonathan. He flew down to Richmond immediately. When I placed the necklace in his hands, he wept. He said it was like getting a piece of his mother's soul back. He told me a story. That his father, Colonel Sterling, had bought the sapphire from a small jeweler in Saigon during one of his tours in Vietnam. He'd kept it for years, later having it set into the necklace. He said its blue was the exact color of my mother's eyes, Jonathan told me, and that it had been his North Star through the darkest nights of the war. And that's when I truly understood. A legacy isn't just what we leave behind. It's the stories of love, courage, and hope that are woven through our lives. Those stories, if they are lucky, find their way to people who will listen and live on forever. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, no matter what life throws at you, no matter how fierce the storm, the sun will eventually come out. And sometimes, at the end of the road, there isn't a locker full of junk. There's a treasure just waiting. You just have to be brave enough to open the door.